Good morning. So my name is Peter Nightingale. I've been a project manager, consultant, trainer, self-employed since 1992. Before that, I was man and boy in the computer industry, starting as an operator and ending up as a project manager 15 years or so later. So that's really all types of sectors of industry, mainly IT, but also oil, pharmaceutical, retail, and now into product. And Martin?
Good morning. So I'm Martin Heritage. So I'm also a project manager at Megger. As John had mentioned, previously I'd worked at Johnston Sweepers, who had successfully implemented critical chain. So I'm a newbie at Megger. I've only been there 14 months. I think some of the guys in engineering have been there maybe 30, 40 years in some cases. And obviously I worked with Goldborough UK since 2010, obviously working at Johnston Sweepers, and then now again for the implementation at Megger.
Okay, thank you. Megger Instruments is the part that we work for. They make measurements, electrical measurement equipment. You may, if you have an electrician come round and do some electrics on your house, he could use Megger equipment. It's also used right up in power stations, anything to do with electrical measurement. Okay. We are based in Dover, right next to the PO head office. If you ever see the PO head office, we can look out over the docks. We have 4 plants, one in UK in Dover, we have 2 in the US, and 2 more in Germany and 1 in Sweden. So we are quite a global company. The turnover, last published accounts, was 250 million euros. So in terms of that, we are pretty successful. And this year, as far as the Dover side is concerned, is our 50th anniversary. In fact, actually, the celebrations are on Saturday. So we're all getting dressed up and going to a do on Saturday down in Dover. Like I said, I've been working for Megger for 2 years. Well, that's only partially true. I started working on an internal project, an innovation project for Megger in January 2015. And before that, I was working on and off, sort of one day a month, act as a consultant for the existing project managers. And as we sort of were moving through the project, there were lots of sort of business problems around project management. So we decided with the stakeholders to actually try and tackle them. Now, if you look at those problems, there's nothing really new. A lot of companies have suffered the same and still suffering similar problems. But they were there, to say the least. Poor requirements documentation. Sometimes not very well written, sometimes there were things missing. There were also points like, well, it's obvious you should be doing that. Yeah, but it's not in the requirements document. So the requirements themselves of the products that we had to develop was not particularly good. There was poor delivery of performance against timescales. And I looked back over quite a few years, and really 3 months late was good. And then pick a number after that. So we weren't good at actually getting things out of the market. And there's a lot of reasons why that's the case. I think John used a phrase when he first started working with us, that our engineers like to polish the cannonball. So actually we're very, very good at producing very good technical instruments. But actually they might be 6 months late, they might be longer. So in the market, we're recognised as very, very good, very technically capable instruments. But actually, we just weren't getting them to the market. There was also a thing about, if you have a company that's been on a site for 50 years, actually it builds its own culture. And there is a very, very strong culture there as well. And actually, that's the sort of thing we're trying to adapt, improve, change. Out of that as well, there was scope creep. We've got a very, very clear process, But actually, as we all know, if you've seen the graphs, doing changes, in our case, when you've got a beta model, which is almost ready for to be put onto the market, you start changing the spec. Actually, guess what? You're introducing delay. It's obvious, but that's the sort of thing that happens. We have inflexible resource allocation. So you could have one project team that actually is lacking resource, and then another team is not quite there at the moment to need all of the resource that's been allocated to it. So again, there wasn't that free movement at the engineering level. And the last one there, no clear project priorities. So projects were coming in, and I think that's more of the sort of the stakeholders didn't have a real grasp of, right, that is the number one project. And even now, when we've started to sort it out, there are still smaller projects further on down that still haven't got a priority. So if you add all of those things up, there's very, very clear business problems that needed to be resolved to help our just basic standard traditional project management using critical path. But we wanted to sort of take it a step further. So we started to talk about using critical chain and started talking to Goldratt in about February, March this year, I think it was, something like that. We got the implementation, we got agreed, we got the purchase order, and I think John started to work with us in May. But before that, we actually started to do some pre-work. So let's try and get our own house in order first before we lay critical chain project management on the top. So we enhanced our existing stage gate processes, especially at the front end. So to what we call checkpoint 1, checkpoint 2, we enhanced that process about getting the requirements. So we fully understood what we were going to build. We had a clear definition of what an alpha model is and what a beta model is. We knew what it is, so that's what it is. So the difference between the two is an alpha model is definitely not fully functional. It may have just one or two bits that work, but we will take it out accompanied by an engineer. We will take it out and show customers. A beta model is fully functional. It should do what it says on the tin, and it's manufactured by manufacturing processes. So it's almost there. So we actually really tried to understand what those two distinct models were that we were producing. Okay. We improved our requirements definition, and in fact the last one, with the first project that we started with CCPM, I would say is probably the best requirements that have been delivered by far, by a long way. We also we're still introducing the concept of good enough. And I would say that this is probably one of the hardest things that people have found to grasp. You actually have not got to keep on polishing that cannonball to make it shinier and shinier. If it works, if it fulfills the requirements, then actually you can release it. It's not a problem. Oops, sorry, I've gone back one. Ooh, too far. We re-evaluated the role of the stakeholder group. So they fully understand what their role is, what they have to do, and where they can and cannot interfere. Not so sure they actually keep to it all the time, but actually it is on the table to discuss quite a lot. We also have a lot of workshops with the staff. And it's quite interesting. We have about 40, 45 engineers. And when we first started to do the workshops, some in the project team, some all together, but in different times, they've heard the message 3 or 4 times. Some people got it straight away. The penny just dropped. But I would say there is still a percentage that are still struggling to understand what we're trying to achieve. Okay, especially when you get to the area of about taking the estimates, taking a 10-day estimate and taking 4 days and putting it in the buffer. That still causes a lot of concern. And Final one there is that we also link all work packages back to requirements in the requirements document. So therefore, you can go up to an engineer and say, what work package are you working on? And if it can't be linked back to a requirement in the requirements document, the question is, well, what are you doing? What are you doing? So out of that last one, that made us really evaluate the documentation we used, which is back to this beginning of the process that we use. So we have some sort of documents. It's our own sort of words, really. But the first one there is the PRD, which is the product requirements document. It's actually marketing requirements. So it's people like the product manager, the people who want to sell this product. This is what I want in the next version, whatever it may be. The difficulty we had with this is a lot of those people wanted to give us the technical solution. So we've had to, give me a requirement, not necessarily the technical solution. We'll give you that. The product requirement specification, that's when it gets handed to engineering, and this is what we're going to deliver technically. So it's taking the requirements but making a technical spec of it. And product breakdown structure, that's just the hierarchical work breakdown structure that you see. And with that, Martin's created a template, so more or less now the whole thing is there already for project managers to use. And then the final one there is a requirements verification matrix where we can see the tests that we have to do to prove that we have delivered that requirement. So we have those documents. I wouldn't say that they are 100% in place yet and to the right standard, but we are getting there without a doubt. And there is the document flow. So you have the PRD, which is for us, for the engineering department, is the key document. If you don't give us that, we're not going to start this project, which has given us some interesting discussions, to say the least. But we're not going to start. Simple as that. And I think the stakeholders now back that. So we're not going to try and start early because you're late, if that makes sense. So that's in green, which is product management or people that want the product to be changed, updated or enhanced. And all the rest is engineering. And then the middle one there, which is the CCPM plan, we use Microsoft Project, and that's where I'm going to hand over to Martin, because we use Concerto now.
Thank you, Peter. So, Peter's given you an overview of where we were preparing for critical chain implementation. Well, obviously, we're working in partnership with GoalRate UK, and once we'd prepared ourselves, we started to look at the implementation. So, obviously, we'd had this early decision that that's something we wanted to do. We'd had a previous project a few years ago where they'd trialled critical chain and had a positive result. So there was a lot of enthusiasm through the stakeholder group to use critical chain. We've done phase one with GoalRate UK. That's completed, which was the initial training of all the staff, the initial sort of rollout. Now it's full rollout and sustainability. So we're continually training and ensure that we've got sustainability for the future. So I'm going to go through a few slides that just give you sort of an overview of how we're planning and executing our projects. It's early stages at Megger, where we started with John Muncaster back in May. But these are sort of the steps and the things that we've done during that implementation, and also some of the lessons we've learned and the experiences we've had. So before we go into project planning, obviously Peter's given you an overview of what we wanted to prepare. And basically the prerequisites to going into project planning for CCPM, we've defined as good enough requirements, which we've identified as these key documents that get delivered from project management, and also our response to that in engineering as the specification document. The requirements verification matrix, now this was something that was definitely a missing ingredient from project plans at Megger, where they were planning the development of the project, but not really focused on how they were going to test, do the verification on the systems to make sure they'd met the original requirements. So that's a new document. The other one, which also wasn't really used, was a product breakdown structure. So these are sort of what I call systems engineering approaches. And for me, the product breakdown structure, if you're doing a new product development, is absolutely vital. It's vital to get something in draft format when you go into planning, but it's also a useful document throughout the project process, through execution. So what we encourage is that the engineering, the project team that will go into the planning phase have got a really good overview of these documents, the requirements, they've understood the verification process, and they've got an understanding of how the instrument will be broken down into its systems, its subsystems and key components, because that defines the development process. It also considers the manufacturing processes, supply chain, and all of these things can be considered during the planning process. Died. So, planning. I'll get the mouse working again. So, the thing that I really like about CCPM is that we've gone back to basics with project planning. I think there's a tendency, and especially at Megger in the past years, is for the requirements to be defined, the project team would review it, and then the project manager would then lock himself away in an office for a few weeks and create the most complicated Microsoft project plan he could produce, that only he could understand, and you've got no buy-in from the team. And as soon as there's a change, it's impossible to manage the changes in the Gantt chart. And by the end of the project, no one's using Microsoft Project as an execution tool. So we wanted to go back to basics, a simple back to basics approach. So the idea is that it's a team effort, and we want this to be a team plan. We want it to be our plan, not just the project manager's plan that he's devised in his closed office. This is a plan that's been developed by the team, and they get ownership. This is our plan. We've all bought into this plan. Obviously, good enough. We don't want it too precise. We just want something that's good enough, because as soon as we get into execution, things change. If we've made it too precise, then we've got to manage those changes in the plan. And it's a post-it planning workshops. We're back to post-its. It's simple, it's visual, it's easy, and this is a real positive feedback that we've got from the engineering, is they love going back to this simple process of post-it planning. So what we do is, you can see an example there. We get the teams together, so we'd look at maybe the development team, we'd get them in a room, we'd do the planning, and we get them to write down their key work packages for the project. So we're looking at the previous documents, and we're defining the key deliverables on those work packages, and we're just starting to lay them out on a wall to start to build the project network. So it's a clearly defined work package with the clear deliverables, and then obviously then we start to add the estimates. So as we're building this network of post-it notes, and this takes several workshops, this is not just one, we've got different teams coming in, we've got the main project team, cross-functional teams, this could include manufacturing, supply chain, and we're building this network of post-its, and we're just making sure that we've covered everything that we've seen in the requirements documents, and we're making sure that it meets the business expectations, just as an initial overview of the plan. So the planning process itself, so we go through these planning workshops, which is the post-it planning, and then once we're happy that we've got all the work packages defined and they're of a good granularity, we then go into time estimates. And we're not looking to spend days trying to refine the time estimate down to the final hour. We just want a good enough time estimate that gives confidence that we can deliver that work package in the time allowed. So we're looking for 8 out of 10 or 80% confidence. Once we've got those times, we then start to do some logical checks on the project plan. And this is also some positive feedback from the engineering, is that just talking through the project plan, we start from the back and we do our necessity checks and sufficiency checks. And just talking through the plan has highlights errors, removes some complex logic if it's not necessary, and to make sure that we've covered all the necessary work packages required. Once we've got this plan and we're all happy with it, we then load it into MS Project, which is just the tool just to load it into sort of the transition between post-it notes and the Concerto execution tool. And then we can start to look at adding the durations, looking at the total project overview, and looking at the due date of the project, and making sure that that meets our business expectations. And then the last part, which is the critical chain part, or part of it, which is where we're cutting the tasks and adding the buffers. Now, on my previous life at Johnson Sweepers, we took the decision to go with the cutting the time durations in half. We add the 25% in the buffer, and we take 25% and throw it away. Now, because of the poor performance at Megger, actually delivering anything, we've taken the decision that in the first phase, we're not going to be so aggressive. We're going to keep all the duration, and we're just going to take some of the task time and put it in the buffers at the end to manage the uncertainty. So the buffer size is 50% of the total length of the tasks, but we're not throwing any time away. At the moment, we think that's too aggressive. We want to be able to get to a point where we can just deliver on time, and when we got to that confidence, then we can start to look at reducing our project lengths by 25%. So once we've got it into MS Project, we can then load it into Concerto, and then we're running in execution. So we've got a few projects in execution at the moment, and just based on what we've gained so far, the question is really how we're delivering on time scope. Well, it's early for us. We haven't delivered any projects yet through critical chain. We're at the early phases. But if we just look at some of the points which are key to maintaining that good progress through the project, the main one, I think, obviously, we've got a new tool for Megger. So everyone is now working through Concerto, which is the execution tool. That gives you good task priorities. But we've got to encourage all the engineers have got to get used to working according to the Concerto priorities. And most importantly, we need them to do their task updates. So if you're a task manager, we need you to be logging into the Concerto tool and making your remaining duration estimates every evening. And that's a challenge. We're asking them to not worry about percentage complete, which that would have been the old question from the old project management. How much have you done? How much have you finished on this? And say, well, I'm 50% of the way through. We need to forget that, and we're now looking at remaining duration. And we're encouraging the engineers that are task managers to just ask themselves the question every evening, how many days left will it take for me to finish this work package? And to include any holiday or any time that you're not at the office, this is included in the duration. It's not touch time, it's elapsed time. So once we've got these updates in Concerto, we can then start to read the fever charts. So obviously, every morning the project manager can now look into Concerto, and he's got a clear picture status of the project. And we can start to look at the fever charts and the trends on the fever charts and start to determine if we need to make recovery actions. So once we've got this daily updates, we're getting very fast information about the status of the project, which then allows focused decision making. So it allows the project manager to focus on the critical chain and make the decisions necessary to keep that on track. So the thing that I think also in my previous life at Johnston and also now working again at Megger with critical chain is that there's this big myth that the engineers get this big myth that we're just going to cut all your durations in half and we want you to work twice as hard. It's this big panic. But what you actually find, and the engineers start to realise, is that we're now focused on the critical chain. And if you are on the critical chain, we want to give you as much support as possible to deliver that work package in the time duration that's been allocated. So this is from supporting the engineer, giving me extra resource, and also that's working up through the chain of project management focus and also stakeholder focus if necessary. And they're seeing that as a benefit from the critical chain. And it allows us to take early recovery actions. If we can see that we're trending towards the red, we can make recovery actions. And we're making recovery actions of maybe 1 or 2 days, whereas before we would say we can fix that in the future, we'd leave it, and then we're trying to recover 2 months. And it's just not possible. We've got to challenge the mindset. We've always done it this way. And that's something, we've got a lot of guys in the engineering department that have been there for 30 or 40 years. We've always done it this way. And we're saying, well, we need to do it differently. We need to change. Oh, I've always done my testing sequentially. Well, no, we want you to do it in parallel now. We want 3 engineers, 2 test stations, and we need to work differently to be able to deliver projects faster. And avoid pushing work to the future. It's very easy in Concerto to look at your tasks and say, well, if I don't do those 2, I can just move them into a task in the future. I can complete this early, and that work I'll do later on. And it's very easy to do that, and we need to avoid that because we're just creating this bow wave of work at the end of the project that then significantly impacts on the due date. So progress so far, we've got 5 projects in execution. They're all early stage in execution. Some are in the red, some are in the yellow. And we've got 2 projects that are in the planning stage at the moment. And what we're trying to do is we're trying to get those project managers up to speed with the planning process, and then get them up to speed with execution using Concerto, reading the fever charts and making those early recovery actions. We still need to do further training. We want the project managers to be project managers. We don't want them to be administrators and playing with MS Project for their whole project execution duration. We want them to be focused on the critical chain and helping in any way they can to keep the project flow. I think generally we've got a positive impact so far. It is early days, but so far the engineers like order. They like to be in a scheduled environment, and they like the fact that Concerto gives them clear priorities. This is your top priority. Work on this package, deliver it, and then work on the next. Obviously, there's changes in behaviour. We're asking them to declare the remaining durations every evening, and we want them to be truthful with it, not to hide from the truth that they've just added another 10 days to a 2-day task. We just need to know that information so we can react to it. Cultural changes, so we've got a lot of history at Megger, and it's a challenge where we're trying to change the culture and the way they work. And lessons learned, there are a lot of things that we need to do, but it's a continuous improvement. So the next steps really for us at Megger, obviously we're continually looking at our project list, and that's something we need to focus on. We've got a project list. We did have too many projects in execution, and we're trying to now to reschedule that project list. As Peter said, we need to give them priorities, and we need to make sure we've got all these requirements defined up front before we go into execution. And we need to define the release strategy. So we've defined what we class as the constraint for the release strategy. So we make sure that we've got the throughput of projects through the business. So we've defined that stagger, and now it's a case of just implementing that according to the project list. Full kit points. We haven't got any full kit points at the moment. We've got our stage gate process that we've migrated from our old way of working, but full kit points is something that we definitely need. And we've identified a few areas of the project that we will use. We'll implement them on the next plans, and we obviously need a full kit manager to police those full kits. Task manager role, it's for some of the guys that are task managers, they've adopted it, they like it, they can manage the responsibility. Others can't, and we're just in that phase of realising who's a good task manager and who's not, who can't understand what remaining duration is and who can. And obviously we need to support those guys and give them more training. And it's that responsibility that not every task, it's not the responsibility of the project manager to deliver all tasks. He's to deliver the whole overall project. And we want these task managers to take responsibility for their work packages. So planning templates, that's something that I'm working on at the moment, is that we need planning templates to make the planning process easier. So when we go into this post-it planning stage, we've already got a template of post-its basically, which we've already defined, where we've found that during this early stages we've missed some work packages, some critical points. They would be included in the templates. And the final point there is that once we've gone through a planning stage, we need to improve our communication to the stakeholders. We need to define, well, this is the project we've planned, this is the due date that we've got, and these are the risks and assumptions that we've made during that planning process. And we need to be clearer and communicate that better to the stakeholders. Say, these are the risks we've taken to achieve your expectations on a due date, these are the assumptions we've made, so that we've got a good agreement from the project team, and then obviously the stakeholders are happy with that. So that just gives you an overview really of where we are with critical chain. It is early days, but so far it's been a very positive feedback from the implementation. Any questions?